Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, Research Community Manager for Sage MethodSpace, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Professor Leslie Wood. And we're going to talk a little bit about ethics and community-based research and what some of those lessons might be for any kind of researcher. But first, if you're new to MethodSpace, this is a blog community sponsored by Sage Publishing. We're interested in everything to do with designing, planning, conducting research, writing about what we learn, and sharing the results in all different kinds of ways. And you can see at the center of this Venn diagram, we have teaching and learning, because we think that whether you are a brand new researcher or a very experienced researcher, we all have something to learn. And that's what keeps me excited and why I'm thrilled that Dr. Wood could join me here today. So why don't you just start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Leslie Wood. I'm a research professor at Northwest University in South Africa. And I founded about 4 years ago a research entity called Community-Based Educational Research, which basically means we do community-based research and participatory research of all forms. And it's something quite, well, it's not new, it's been around for a long time, but in the academy, it's still pretty new in South Africa. So, but we have actually taken off. We've attracted about 40 researchers, PhDs, who now work with us, which is quite a thing because none of them had ever heard of it, community-based research before or practiced it. So I'm very glad to be up. And I'm also part of international networks. There are huge international networks doing this. I think the time has come for this type of research now as people change the paradigm.
Well, I was very pleased to come across your article, which we will link for our readers so they can take a look at it, because I think that there are important points you bring up that are valuable to any researcher. Whether you are planning to do action research or even research in the field, how we engage with communities and how we learn from people, I think it's a good time to re-examine. I want to just share one quote from your article. Participation under more traditional approaches is normally confined to the sharing of experiences with the researcher, who then takes the knowledge and interprets it through a suitable theoretical lens to suit their own purposes. This acquisition of knowledge has been described in the literature as parasitic and parachute research, since the academic researcher merely feeds off the knowledge of participants and discounts their role in the knowledge creation process. And I think, to me, a couple of the things that stood out from this that I would like to hear you discuss. One is that even if we are thinking about, say, engaging with the participants or getting input from the participants, or perhaps having a less structured interview style so that the participants can have more input. By the time we have gotten participants, we've already made the big decisions about the study in terms of, what is the problem and what is important about this problem to study, and who or what sources are important to understanding that problem. So maybe, just like to open it up to you to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that is the issue. Academia is geared towards producing academic outputs. So when you come up with something like community-based research, participatory research, they throw up their hands and say, no, you can't go to the community before you have a research proposal and ethical clearance, which is where a lot of people get stopped. And this is why I wrote this article, because people would say, oh, it's so difficult to do this type of research because of ethics. So I've been on a mission to educate the ethics boards, because what you would call IRBs, because I don't think they're anti this type of research. This paradigm is so strange. We've been brought up or educated as researchers, most of us, to think objectively. Research has to be objective. Qualitative was a big move a few, decades ago, but it's still objective. It's still my interpretation of what you're telling me, and I acquire the knowledge, as I said there. So CBR is more about decolonization of knowledge, accepting that people living, and it doesn't have to be in, sometimes indigenous knowledge people think of, like plants and, stuff like that, but it's local knowledge. So no matter what community you're working with, even if you go into with a community of professionals, those people who are actually, living the problem that you're working on, experiencing it on a daily basis, have the knowledge that you can learn from. And without that knowledge, you will fail because otherwise your research will end up not being sustainable. So the aim of CBR is an educative aim in a way, especially working in my context in South Africa, where we're working a lot in very disadvantaged communities, people who've been impoverished by the system. And there's lots of course, problems, but that's worldwide now, I think. And, so educative, I don't mean that in a patronizing way. I mean, when they finish the research, by participating in it, they should have learned a lot. And they should have developed personally self-confidence and so on. It also has a political intent. When I say political, to change policy to even at a micro level. It's got to bring about transformative change. And it's got emancipatory intent in that it frees people from this. This is part of the decolonization of knowledge, that people realize that their knowledge is valuable. You don't have to be a professor or a doctor to have valid knowledge. And I think that's, as people get more access to knowledge nowadays, I mean, you don't need, you've just got Google, you can find out anything. So it's more about how do we mobilize that knowledge in order to bring about change in our own lives and in the lives of the community. So it's about decolonization and democratization of knowledge. And that's, that movement really is gaining sort of favor now internationally.
Right. Well, it seems to me that when we have a lot of discussion about research impact, and on MethodSpace, we've been talking about research relevance. I mean, what difference does it make that you did this? So, to me, it seems like if we start thinking about that, like we've done the whole study, now we're ready to write it up. We're thinking, oh, how can I make this relevant to someone? Should I publish it in a different type of, a professional or general public kind of publication so that I can get the word out to different audiences? But by then, again, you've already, you've already made the decision of what you think is important to study, what merits scholarly inquiry and the kind of disciplined thinking that goes into doing empirical research. You've already decided that. So now you're thinking, oh, well, how can I share my brilliant insights, with the world, versus starting from the beginning to say, well, I'm reading the literature and it looks to me like this is an under-researched problem. This is an underserved community. There's a gap in the literature. I'm going to go study this, but not realizing that there may be other factors that while you're thinking I perceive that X is the big problem to study, the people who are in that setting, which, as you say, could be professionals or it could be a tribe, it could be anyone, what do they think is important? What do they need to know? What is going to help them move forward and overcome these obstacles where your findings could actually create some benefit?
Yeah, it's not our findings, not the researchers' findings, it's collaborative findings. So yeah, you really do have to, from the beginning, I always start off by setting up some kind of ethical agreement with the participants and saying,
Okay.
what do you want to get out of this? You know, this is, and I'm upfront, like I'm a researcher, I'm paid to do research. So I need to get the data and I need to use it for academic publications, which probably you're not, you know, they're not even interested in. But what do you want to get out of that? And so I always say to my students, or when I'm doing research myself, you know, there has to be some kind of product, whether, you know, do they want a training program, a manual? Do they want a community event? Do they want a policy brief? And we help them to do that so that, you know, they can carry on. For instance, one project I was in, it was because I'm in education, it was teachers in a primary school in a very disadvantaged area, and parents came together and they developed a manual to help to train other parents how to support the child at school, because really some parents don't even talk to the children about school. They think it's the teachers, and you have to know the background of the schooling here to see how that would be so needed. And then when they finished that program, they had a participant manual and a trainer manual in their own language and in English that they could use, and those parents who were unemployed actually then formed this little group, and then they could go and help other parents and give the program in other schools and so on. So it was creating purpose in their life, even, you know, starting up some kind of income generation, because I think the local university actually, the community engagement actually gave them a little stipend to do that in the other schools. So it's got to be of value to them. It's got to bring about some kind of change. But for the academic doing this type of work, their needs requires a huge paradigm shift from me, the expert, me, the knower, my research, my learning, and so on, to shift about, you know, I need to learn from the people I'm working with. And I think that's a problem with the ethics committees, because they don't see, they see, especially in a country like South Africa, they see the community as vulnerable. So they have to be protected from us. And meanwhile, this research does the opposite, because for us, the ethical imperative is not just don't do any harm, it is do good. If you don't do good, if they don't benefit, then it's your research not actually valid, and it's unethical. So they cannot judge this research by the same ethical standards as objectivity. For instance, in recruitment, an independent person must come in and recruit, so that there's no power relations. So we say, no, that's not going to happen, because we've probably got a relationship, not a research relationship, but a relationship of some kind with the people we're working with, who've come to us and said they would like our help, or we've gone to them and saying, would you like our help? And we've started something. So we can't send in a strange person, but what we do is say, okay, our power, we address the power relationships right from the beginning, and we try when we make it clear that, you know, we're on an equal basis here, no matter you know, what our positions are and everything. I don't think we can ever truly be equal. You have to work hard the whole way through, depending who you're working with. But at least there must be reciprocity. There must be something out of it, those people. And respect for persons, that is a big ethical thing in our research. And that is usually, you know, like anonymity and confidentiality. But we found the people they work with, they want their names, they want their faces in photos, in your thesis, in the articles. They want to be acknowledged. So we always make sure that they have that option, and not see them as vulnerable, but see them as very capable and critical thinkers. So yes, it's just changing the paradigm of the research. It's not easy to do, because I run courses on community-based research with my colleagues and with academics, and it's very difficult. I mean, often they say to me, you know, it took me about 2-3 years before I really understood this, because they've been ingrained to work in a different way from what they said themselves. Yeah.
So in your article, you said community-based research may be inherently ethical given the humane values which underpin it, but a prolonged relationship with others tends to carry more ethical risks than traditional approaches
Yeah.
where interaction is limited to the time it takes to interview or complete a questionnaire. And I write about online research, and I think what I talk about in my work is there's a need to think about the relationship building that in a more traditional types of research that involves human participants, we talk about building rapport and trust. And here, you're talking about, engaging with people, at the really outset of the project. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you initiate those relationships, and where does it start? How do you identify the stakeholders, and at what point do you then say, okay, well, now we need to have informed consent, or how does that process work?
Well, normally it works two ways. Either people come to you and say they have this issue, and can you help because they know you're working in this way, or we will be interested in a specific field and approach a community and ask them, is this? But with the approach that I use, participatory action learning and action research, we start with relationship building the whole time and partnership development. So the ideal is that you will have say an NGO. It's not always individuals that you're having relationships with. Say an NGO. So you would build up a relationship with that NGO and say, what kind of things are you wanting to do research and so on. And then you start from there. Well, how do you want to do it? And or what do you need to learn in order to be able to participate fully in this research?
Right.
Because we can also, they don't know about research, so we can train you in and give you options on how to gather data and so on. What are the kind of questions you want to ask? So they're really involved the whole time, and that to me is an ethical thing, and that's why in the checklist, the first question. Now this is a checklist that the ethics committee can use when they're evaluating the research proposal, because they're coming from a different paradigm. Has the researcher had appropriate training or experience in participatory forms of research? Because we are made to do research ethics training every 3 years, and that's part of it. Are we qualified to do the research? Now, but having a PhD doesn't really qualify you to do this type of research, because you've probably done it in another paradigm. So, have you done a course in CPR, or have you actually done it and successfully? And sort of provide evidence on that is very important. And then, how to has a researcher provided evidence of how they engaged the participants in relationship building and partnership development? So you're going to have to convince the ethics committee that these people want to work with you, and you haven't just steamrolled them into doing it. And so does the researcher have an ethical agreement drawn up, and so on? So those kind of things that make the review board think differently, because otherwise they just come in and say, this is not objective enough, and this can't happen, and so on.
So what advice would you give to someone who is thinking about, perhaps doing, survey research, or, another kind of research, even quantitative research, who want to engage with key stakeholders, at that initial stage, in terms of defining the problem and also defining the kinds of outputs that would be useful, like you say, a guide, a workshop, or whatever the kind of output. What advice would you give to researchers?
On the level of participation, obviously, if you're an astrophysicist or something, you can't go out to communities, but you can. But the communities won't be able to engage in actual research or development of whatever, because they don't have that technical knowledge. But I've been working a lot with engineers now. Even we're not usually very communicative. I don't want to be stereotypical, but they, you know, if they're looking, say, it's in this country, the water issues, the sinkholes appearing all over because the water pipes have been like that. So how does the community deal with that? Well, you need engineering expertise to actually repair that and maybe prevent it in future. But you can still involve the community and say, what problems is this causing you? How, you know, and what do you want to see happen, and so on. So I think you can use any methods within, say, a participatory research design. And I always say, you know, call it what you want. In the end, it's got to be action research, because you've got to keep on reflecting on what are we doing here with this community, you know, together, you and the community, because, you know, you're working with people over a prolonged period of time. Conflicts arise, things, you know, things change. So we have to keep on reflecting. Are we still on the right path? Are we still got the same vision? Do we need to change anything here? Do we need to ask a question? And so on. So it is action research. It's cycles of action and reflection. But within that, you can do a quantitative survey, because you might need to know how many people in this community, let's say it's something to do with water or whatever, how many people are affected by the pollution in the river in this community, for instance. You know, how many people have been sick in the last year? Has there been an increase in sickness? So you might go to clinics or wherever and gather information from them. So you can use surveys, you can use questionnaires, you can use quantitative. What you can do is use experimental designs, because there's no work in this type of research. You can't say, you know, here's a control group, and you can't control any variables. There's too many. So the paradigm to me has to be participatory from the outset. But how you gather data and analyze it depends on what question you actually want to ask. But you can't go in there with a positivistic paradigm and say, right, we're doing a survey, because then you're not involving the people. Positivism means there's a right and a wrong, and you're going to find the right answer, and you're going to prove that this works. You know, so the paradigm has to be participatory and transformative.
Right.
So that's the advice, and that's what the ethics committees don't get, because sometimes it's made up from, you know, by people who've just been in either positive or objective qualitative, and they don't see how there can be any other kind of research. You know, academics can be quite close-minded, although we're supposed to be lifelong learners, but not.
Right. So I think, yes, what we're trying to propose is a different way of thinking about opening your mind and your role as a researcher. And I mean, I would say that, you know, as we think about the researcher and the field of study, whatever that may be, that we're not denigrating the role of the researcher, because the role of the researcher is very, very important. I mean, to know those techniques, to know how to select and collect, generate data and analyze it and interpret it is a very valuable skill. In today's world, where, you know, anybody can just be like, well, I think this, and post it online, and you know, it'd be read. We offer something different to the world, to say, no, it's more goes into it than that. And so I think, you know, there's a real, you know, so to those who are listening, we're not saying that the researcher is not important. It's very important, but it's the way that we use those skills that I think we're trying to suggest some rethinking.
You have to develop skills that not traditional researchers, let's call them that, don't develop. For instance, you have to be able to facilitate a group. You have to be able to recognize when there's underlying tensions. You have to be able to, you know, see where power relations are coming into play, and so on. So that's why I think it's essential. If you've not got to say, I've got a social work background, so I learned how to do community and counseling and group facilitation. But most, like my colleagues who were taught to be teachers, rather, you know, are used to telling people what to do. So unless you have some kind of psychological or community development training or that, most researchers don't. I think you need to sort of do some kind of just a short course to understand the shift in paradigm and develop the skills if you don't have them, or make sure you've got somebody there who has the skills. I was working with a group of present project we have is working with unemployed youth. There's such a problem here in this country with people coming out, graduates and school leavers, and there's no hope, and they don't know what to do, and they don't really have the skills because their education has been so bad. Not so much graduates, but the school leavers. So we've been working with them, and one of the things we used with them was body mapping. And you do not realize the trauma those kids are holding inside them. And to ask them to do something like, to like talk about their experiences of being a young person living in a township or rural area in these circumstances. And so you have to be able to deal with that kind of emotional thing as well. Not that you have to deal with it, but just recognize it and make sure you got somebody on your team who can deal with it. Because and most researchers aren't trained for that. They're used to sitting in an office and not really having any relationship with the people they're gathering data from, or just the pieces of paper that they're analyzing after been filled in by other people. So yes, it is tricky, but I think you really grow as a person and you change. You can't do this type of research and not change yourself.
Right. So what do you suggest for people who are teaching research methods, to help prepare people to be more engaging and more responsive, whatever the technique of research they're planning to do, to adopt some of these kinds of principles that would make it more useful?
In my CBR course, what I always start off with is reflecting on yourself. What is my research paradigm? And I come from a social justice perspective. Not everybody does, but I think everybody should nowadays. But we're doing this because we want to help people make a difference in their lives, to solve complex issues in a good way. So it's for the public good and so on. So that changing that paradigm and looking at like what do I really think about that. And I always say, if you don't give a damn, then don't do this type of research because you're going to cause more harm than good. So looking at yourself, looking at your paradigm, what I actually believe about knowledge, what is my epistemological assumptions? Do I really believe that people I'm working with know anything? So you've really got to start interrogating and you can use teaching methods to let people see how important listening to people is for the validity of your research and so on. And there's lots of material out there being developed worldwide. I'm part of what they call the Knowledge for Change Consortium, run by the UNESCO chair on CBR and social responsibility, and that's why it was formed, is to develop capacity to do this type of research. And I think there's about 5 institutions all over the world, in all the continents apart from North America. Not North. There is in Canada, but not in America. There is in South America. There is in Mexico, but not in many other countries all over the world. And so there's lots of stuff out there to draw on to teach how to do this. So there's lots of stuff.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with us about this, and I hope that our readers and viewers will really give it some thought and look at how these ideas might be beneficial in their own practice. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
I could talk for ages about this, but I think that we've covered the most important thing. Just say, read the article, look at the checklist, and take it. See if you can use it with your own IRB boards, and start changing ideas, because this is the biggest complaint I hear all the time from people doing this. How am I going to get this through ethics? It's not so difficult. It's just a matter of not going in with confront hunting, because some people they do say strange things like, what use is this research, you know, because it's outside their positivistic
Mhm.
paradigm. You just have to learn to say, oh, okay, like, don't get upset about that, but
Right,
try, you know, engage them and say, you know, this is a different paradigm, and this is how I can help you to understand the paradigm.
right, right. I
Take
think,
it
I
from
think
there.
learning to explain your research ideas is very important, not only for the ethics and IRB types of boards and committees and everything within an institution, but also, you know, for others who might support it, or even for those people in those communities you want to engage. So I think being
Yeah,
able to really distill down, you know, the purpose of your study, the
it's
intention,
very
what you want to accomplish, be able to explain that in a very clear way is a really important skill, you know, whether you're doing, you know, this kind of research or any kind of emerging method that might not be as familiar to the people who are reading it,
mm,
or people who aren't familiar with research at all, or you know, have the sense that it's some, you know, kind of abstract, you know, thing that, you know, someone in the ivory tower does, you know, to, you know, perhaps,
yeah.
you know, coming, you know, finding examples of other research in your field that would exemplify these ideas that would help to build some credibility. And, you know, I would like to share some of the other resources that you've mentioned from the UNESCO project, et cetera, that might, you know, help people to demonstrate to those that are trying to engage that, you know, this isn't something I just made up today. There's, you know, there's some backing
There's lots
to
of stuff
support
on it,
this.
and lots of theses written, and PhDs and so on. So it's not, it's very academic as well, even though it's different.
But thank you so much for your time. I think that these are very important topics to discuss right now.
Okay.